whatever your thing. It could be anything. Canva helps you make that thing a thing. Canva is a simple online tool thing. It's a way to design with our magic AI tool things. You can social media your thing, generate images or videos of your thing, make decks or presentations to show your thing. Whatever needs to be done for your thing, Canva can make it an even better and bigger thing. Canva, the thing that makes anything a thing.
The Colonel's cooked up a new $10 bucket of the day just for you. Monday, 24 nuggets for $10. Tuesday, 8-piece fried chicken for $10. Wednesday, 10 wings for $10. Thursday, 8 tenders for $10. Friday, 24 nuggets for... Ooh, you guessed it, didn't you? $10. The $10 bucket of the day deal. Every weekday, only at KFC. It's finger-licking good.
Prices and participation vary while supplies last. Not available on third-party ordering platforms. Tax extra.
The first explosion hit like thunder without a storm. The impact made glass tremble and shatter across the apartment floor. Parents pulled children out of beds before the sirens even begin. The power is out, so they will only have the glow of the burning buildings to guide them to safety. In the darkness, the family fumbles through the debris as they evacuate. If they make it out, what they'll remember most is how eerily quiet it was as they made their way downstairs. Only hushed words are spoken. Those who can walk either carry or help the others as they encourage and comfort one another. The rhythm of their footsteps keep giving them courage until it's interrupted by another blast. Screams follow as fear ripples through them and the walls groan. There's smoke now, and it's making it hard for them to catch their breath. The air tastes like dust and metal, but they keep moving in the darkness. Each second feels eternal as they wait for silence, silence which never seems to come. Their heartbeats are pounding in their ears, but in the distance, they can hear crying, shouting, and far-off sirens. As they make it close to the ground floor, they burst through the final door and hold each other close. For only a moment, there's relief, until they hear the unmistakable sound of something else falling from the sky.
A rescue operation in the Iranian city of Qom. It's unclear who or what the rescuers recovered, but Iranian media say the airstrike killed at least 5 people in the residential building. Israeli strikes on Tehran overnight also killed the head of intelligence for Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, the latest Iranian leader assassinated.
I'm David Boris, and this is Hostile History, a podcast where we go inside defining conflicts and rebellions. Today, I'm once again joined by fellow historian Roham Alvandi from the London School of Economics and Political Science as we conclude our journey. This is Iran, Oil, Power, and Protest, Part 4, Axis and Allies. As you might remember from the last episode, in the aftermath of the Ayatollah Khomeini's death, the cold relationship between the US and Iran seemed to be warming up, but only briefly. After the long and exhausting Iran-Iraq War, Iran entered the 1990s carrying both scars and ambition. Cities were being rebuilt, roads and industries restored, and a younger generation that had not fully lived through the 1979 revolution was beginning to imagine a different kind of future. The state seemed stable, but beneath the surface, questions were beginning to form. Rafsanjani's presidency had opened up the possibility for normalized relations with the West. The hope was to open Iran's economy to the globe. By 1997, Mohammad Khatami, who was even more liberal than Rafsanjani, came into power, and he basically wanted to end the animosity between the United States and Iran. He even went on CNN to express regret about the hostage crisis. He didn't see the West as something horrible and negative. He wanted Iran to just find its place and be at peace with the world. Newspapers began to flourish. Students debated openly, and intellectual life stirred. Yet the system had limits. In 1999, when students protested the closure of a reformist newspaper, security forces stormed dormitories in the night. The message was unmistakable. Reform could only go so far.
September 11th really was a disaster for these efforts at rapprochement.
That's Roham Alvandi. He is an associate professor at the London School of Economics and has written extensively on Iran's modern history and the history of U.S.-Iranian relations. He has worked for the UN and even was a visiting professor at the University of Tehran. He said that as the new century began, events beyond Iran's borders reshaped its position because in the aftermath of September 11th, relations between the United States and Iran deteriorated quickly, even though they quietly offered support for the U.S. campaign in Afghanistan. We know that in November 2001, Secretary of State Colin Powell shook hands with the Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Karazi at the UN headquarters in New York City. It was a simple yet historic gesture that seemed to be the most tantalizing hint of friendliness between the U.S. and Iran since the Islamic Revolution and the hostage crisis in 1979.
They tried to help the United States in Afghanistan. There was quite a significant amount of, discrete cooperation between the United States and Iran's, even the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, to topple the Taliban essentially and put in power the Northern Alliance that Iran supported. So the Iranians were all in favor of that. They helped the Americans with, target lists, and they promised to help, rescue any American pilots that were downed in Afghanistan to be able to bring them across into Iran. There's all kinds of, cooperation going on. But the Bush administration, George Bush's administration, had a lot of people in it that were vehemently opposed to the idea of this kind of cooperation with the Islamic Republic, or in any way kind of accommodating Iran's interests in this post 9/11 world. People like Dick Cheney, Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, they were totally opposed to this idea. And they, I think, managed to steer President Bush into this kind of more hostile posture towards Iran, which culminated in his famous Axis of Evil speech.
On January 29th, 2002, in his State of the Union address, President George W. Bush branded Iran and its terrorist allies as part of an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. Then, a few days later, on January 31st, National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice summed up the administration's position on Iran by saying that Iran's direct support of regional and global terrorism and its aggressive efforts to acquire weapons of mass destruction belie any good intentions it displayed in the days after the world's worst terrorist attacks in history. It was a significant and dramatic shift in policy.
But that really pulled the rug out from under the reformists in Iran and was music to the ears of the hardliners in Iran who wanted to, scupper any chance of a détente between the US and Iran. And ever since then, we've sort of been on a downward trajectory.
President Bush then claimed that Iraq possessed weapons of mass destruction and that it allegedly supported terrorist groups, so he called for a US-led invasion. A coalition, including allies such as Great Britain and Australia, launched the campaign without a specific United Nations mandate. And even though major combat operations were declared over on May 1st, 2003, the war was marked by high civilian and military deaths and a continued long-term insurgency. Some estimates say there were over 387,000 civilian deaths in the conflict.
Again, the war in Iraq, the invasion of Iraq, could have been an opportunity for cooperation between Iran and the United States. At the end of the day, Saddam Hussein's regime was hated by the Iranians. But again, there was no cooperation with Iran. And so really the Revolutionary Guards and the conservatives in Iran set out to make sure that the American occupation of Iraq would be an utter failure. They supported militias, they supported attacks on American troops, flooded the country with IEDs, and did everything possible to make life as miserable as possible for the United States in Iraq. And ultimately, it was their sort of proxies in Iraq that triumphed, these Shia militias in Iraq that basically took control.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool, and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
In 2003, the Iraq War toppled Iran's longtime enemy, Saddam Hussein, and removed a key regional counterweight. Iran suddenly found itself with new opportunities and extended its influence into Iraq. It cultivated alliances and strengthened ties with groups across the Middle East.
They were filled with hubris. They thought the United States has come along, has defeated the Taliban, has defeated Saddam Hussein. These are our two rivals, these two Sunni Muslim governments that hate us. So they're gone, and we can replace them with our friends. So we'll kind of use American power to our own benefit. And this really filled them with the inflated sense of their own power, essentially. And so when the Arab Spring then comes along, and you have the fall of more pro-American governments, the fall of Hosni Mubarak, the sort of collapse of one Arab government after another, there's a political vacuum that the Iranians are only too happy to fill in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, in anywhere, even in Yemen. They're more than happy to try to fill that political vacuum. And there was a moment, up until, I would say, pretty much until the first Trump presidency, where they really felt that they'd won. That there were pro-Iranian regimes from Tehran to Baghdad to Damascus to Beirut, that there was this kind of arc stretching across the region where, that was all under their influence.
At the same time, the world's attention turned sharply toward Iran's nuclear ambitions. Revelations of undeclared nuclear facilities raised alarms, and although Iran insisted its program was peaceful, others remained unconvinced. Suspicion settled in and never quite left. By the end of the decade, tensions had hardened into a pattern of sanctions, rhetoric, and distance. But diplomacy had not disappeared entirely. A turning point came in 2013 when a new Iranian leadership signaled willingness to negotiate seriously. Behind closed doors, American and Iranian diplomats met cautiously, often in secret. And out of these efforts came the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated under then U.S. President Barack Obama.
The situation that Trump inherited from Barack Obama as far as Iran was concerned, was actually a pretty good one. I mean, the Obama administration had taken the most pressing issue in the US-Iran relationship, which was Iran's nuclear program and Iran's nuclear aspirations, and essentially put it in a box called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which was an agreement in 2015 between Iran and 6 world powers, including the United States, to basically put some safeguards and controls on Iran's civilian nuclear program to make sure it doesn't turn into a military nuclear program. Now, it wasn't a perfect deal by any means. I think it was a better deal for the United States than it was for Iran. But it didn't address the issue of proxies that we've been talking about. It didn't address Iran's missile program, all sorts of things. From the Iranian side, it was actually a pretty bad deal for them because it didn't really address Iran's access to the dollar and to international financial markets, without which basically any kind of sanctions relief is pretty meaningless. Basically, all they got out of it was the ability to sell their oil to predominantly Asian markets, and to a lesser extent to Europe, but really to kind of India and China and Korea. But it didn't really, what they really wanted was access to Western markets, being able to trade with the West, being able to have financial arrangements with the West, and also getting Western investment into Iran. And none of that really materialized from the JCPOA for them. But anyway, it was a really complex deal that took years of negotiations between 6 countries and Iran to get to the finishing line. And Trump comes in and, 2018 rips up the agreement. Why? Because it's Barack Obama's agreement, basically.
For a brief moment, it seemed as if decades of hostility might soften. Iran had agreed to limit its nuclear activities and accept inspections. In return, the United States and others lifted major economic sanctions. The deal extended the time it would take Iran to build a nuclear weapon and opened a narrow window for cooperation. But as we know, the window did not stay open because in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal.
And he can't stand the idea of anything that's the legacy of his predecessor, who he hates. And, that should have been a signal to everyone that Trump is not going to be like any other American president when it comes to dealing with Iran. That all bets are off, essentially. And the Iranians don't really pick up on this and don't really understand who they're dealing with. They're still filled with hubris. They still think that they can get the better of this, TV personality who's become a president. They still think they have this, arc of influence all across the region. But what they're not counting on is the extent to which, Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is going to take advantage of these changes in American politics to basically convince the Americans to cross certain lines that they've never really crossed before. And the first indication of that, I would say, was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in Trump's first term as president.
On January 3rd, 2020, Qasem Soleimani, an Iranian major general, was assassinated by an American drone strike ordered by U.S. President Donald Trump near Baghdad International Airport in Iraq. He was traveling to meet Iraqi Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi because he was considered the second most powerful person in Iran, subordinate to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and was even being considered Khamenei's right-hand man. Iranian leaders vowed revenge.
That move was something that, I'm sure many other American presidents were presented with that option at certain stages, and they would have walked away from it because of the fear that that would very quickly escalate into the kind of war we're seeing now. The Iranians had made a whole series of provocative moves leading up to that. They had attacked the Saudi Aramco facilities. They had sent drones, over the Persian Gulf, attacking, facilities in the GCC countries. So Trump essentially said enough is enough and killed Qasem Soleimani, the essentially, the man who was leading Iran's strategy in the Middle East. And that was a signal, really, that all bets are off and something really different is coming. But they managed essentially to survive Trump's first term without it escalating into war. But the sanctions that Trump put on Iran, the so-called maximum pressure strategy, was really biting the Iranian economy, was having a devastating effect on Iran.
Spotify, it's Jay Shetty. Are you one of those media strategy people? Scrolling through spreadsheets, searching for an audience that pays twice as much attention to your ads than they do on social? Let me introduce you to Fans. And they're here with me on Spotify. Trust me, I know Fans. They don't skip, they stay for hours. They don't move on, they manifest. They're not a demographic group, they're fans.
Spotify advertising. You're among fans.
Athletic Brewing Company crafts award-winning non-alcoholic beers for those who want to be part of every round. With over 185 flavor awards, they're exceptional NA beers that fit your lifestyle and any social occasion. Summer's full of good times, and Athletic fits right in. Go to athleticbrewing.com to have brews delivered to your door, or find them at a bar, restaurant, or store near you. Near beer. Athletic Brewing Company. Fit for all times.
Hey folks out there in podcast land, David here. Are you enjoying today's episode of Hostile History? Well, we sure enjoy bringing you episode after episode of great content. But here is another way that you can support the show. Join Patreon. Patreon.com. If you join Patreon and become a patron today, you'll get advertisement-free episodes, early access to new releases, and exclusive behind-the-scenes bonus content you won't hear anywhere else. Patreon is a safe and secure way to donate to the podcast on a monthly basis, and it has an app for you for your phone and an easy-to-use platform for your computer so you can easily listen to all the great content that is offered. Become a patron today at patreon.com/hostilehistory. The following years were marked by sharp, sometimes violent escalation, and it was now clear that direct confrontation was no longer unthinkable. Throughout the early 2020s, diplomacy flickered, but struggled.
They got some reprieve then during Biden's presidency because Biden tried to switch back to the Obama-era policies. But the problem was the JCPOA was gone, and Biden didn't really have the political capital to be able to rebuild something like that. And nothing really materialized. It was basically just kind of managing the problem and kicking the can down the road.
Attempts to revive the nuclear deal stalled, even as Iran expanded its nuclear capabilities. Meanwhile, tensions played out across the wider Middle East in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and the Persian Gulf through allies, proxies, and shadow conflicts.
The hostility was being ratcheted up step by step. And really it was I think the Israelis in particular and Netanyahu who were driving that process, encouraging Trump to ignore these kind of naysayers and all these people telling him, this can't be done, and basically saying, why can't it be done? It can be done. The axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, all this needs to be rolled back, and we can do it together, essentially. And Netanyahu took the first steps in escalating the conflict with Iran, attacking the Iranian embassy in Damascus, taking out the attack with the pages, taking out all these Hezbollah commanders in one go. And the thing that basically allowed him to go down this road was this catastrophic decision by Hamas to carry out this attack on 7th of October, which essentially opened the gates for Israel and Netanyahu to do anything they want, essentially, in the Middle East without any constraints from the United States.
Fighters from Hamas and allied criminal groups launched a large-scale attack on Israel. Civilians were killed. The violence was atrocious, and hostages were taken. The attack on October 7th, 2023, triggered a massive Israeli military response. This caused astounding levels of civilian casualties in Gaza and triggered international condemnation. This offensive also set off a wider crisis across the Middle East. For the United States, the response was immediate and firm. It backed Israel, deployed military assets to the region, and warned against broader escalation. For Iran, the situation was more complex because they had long supported Hamas politically. What is clear is that the aftermath drew Iran and the United States into a sharper, indirect confrontation.
When Hamas carried out that attack, they were essentially signing the death warrant of Ali Khamenei and most of the leadership of the Islamic Republic. We don't know if the Islamic Republic green-lighted that attack. It's still not clear, but it's certainly the case that they were supporting Hamas and providing weapons to Hamas. And, it was part of that whole policy of hubris, and you can poke the bear only so many times before it bites your arm off, So, and I think the difference is that once Netanyahu had systematically destroyed that axis of resistance, basically taken out Iran's ability to really retaliate with all these proxy forces against Israel itself, then the threshold to war was a lot lower.
And then Donald Trump was elected for a second term.
Trump was filled with his own hubris from, capturing Maduro in Venezuela. And so all of this comes together. Basically, you can imagine the kind of conversations that must have been taking place between Trump and Netanyahu. And also, I suspect Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, that, this is a moment of profound weakness for Iran. This is a historic opportunity to end this regime once and for all. Mr. President, you'll go down in history as the only American president who stood up to the Islamic Republic and erased it from the face of the earth, and you'll be lauded as a hero. And so here we are. Trump has his very own Suez now hanging around his neck, an absolute catastrophe.
In 2025, the United States, alongside Israel, launched strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. It was the first time the U.S. had directly attacked targets inside Iran itself. Tehran responded with threats and retaliation, and the risk of full-scale war became immediate and real. For weeks before anything happened, negotiations were still underway. Diplomats were talking, proposals were being passed back and forth, and publicly, there was still the language of restraint. But behind that, military forces were already moving into position. U.S. carrier groups shifted closer to the region. Israeli planners finalized target lists. The assumption was that diplomacy had failed. And then, on February 27, 2026, while traveling aboard Air Force One, Donald Trump gave the final order to begin what would be called Operation Epic Fury. Hours later, the war began. Iran's response came quickly, but not instantly. As systems came back online and surviving commanders regrouped, Iran launched a broad retaliation across the region. Ballistic missiles rained down on Israel as drone swarms targeted U.S. bases. Then there were the attacks on oil and shipping infrastructure, especially near the Strait of Hormuz. And that's where we are now, on the brink of a much larger and costly war that threatens to topple the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz has become the latest battleground, as Iran's control of it has disrupted global shipping of oil and goods. Inside Iran, the situation has become something more complex than war alone. There are people mourning. There are people afraid. And this is where history meets the present. because the story of Iran in 2026 is not just the story of a war beginning. It is the story of a nation home to the world's oldest civilizations, one that is familiar with protests and shifts in power, which, in modern times, are often fueled by oil. And then, as the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran was still unfolding and no clear outcome was in sight, a single statement began to travel faster than any missile. On April 6, 2026, Donald Trump spoke publicly about Iran in terms that went far beyond strategy or military objectives. He warned that if Iran did not yield, its civilization itself could be brought to an end. It was not a formal declaration of policy, but it did not sound like a passing remark either. In the middle of an already escalating war, it landed as something heavier, a threat that seemed to reach beyond governments and deep into history itself. Thank you for joining me for this special series, and a special thanks to Roham Alvandi. For more information on his books, check out Nixon, Kissinger, and the Shah, the United States and Iran in the Cold War. Hostile History was written by me, Dr. David Boris, and produced by Curious Cast. Our producer was Dila Velasquez. Our audio producer and sound designer was Rob Johnston. Our executive producer is Chris Dunner-Duncombe, the director of Curious Cast, podcast for curious minds. Hostile History is part of the Canyon Entertainment umbrella. Keep your powder dry.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.